She inherited a fortune that made her the most desired woman in London, and the most hunted. When Lady Rosalind Whitmore's name appeared in her uncle's will, 3 men plotted her death. A dozen suitors pursued her hand, and one impoverished viscount offered her the only thing that could save her: his name. Subscribe now, because what began as a business arrangement became a love story that would end in tragedy. The chandeliers of Whitmore House blazed with 1,000 candles as the solicitor unfolded the final testament. The reading room of Whitmore House smelled of beeswax, old leather, and the faint metallic tang of ink still drying on official documents. Rosalind Whitmore sat perfectly still in a high-backed chair, her dove-grey morning dress a stark contrast to the opulent crimson wallpaper that surrounded her. She had not loved her uncle. Truth be told, she had barely known him. But propriety demanded 6 months of mourning, and Rosalind had always been a woman who understood the rules of society, even when she privately despised them. Mr. Pemberton, her uncle's solicitor, adjusted his spectacles for the 3rd time, a nervous habit that made the wireframes catch the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. He was a thin man, with the perpetually worried expression of someone who spent his days managing other people's secrets and fortunes. Today, those secrets weighed particularly heavy. "Lady Rosalind," he began, clearing his throat, "I must confess that the contents of your uncle's will are quite extraordinary." Rosalind's hands remained folded in her lap, though her pulse had quickened. She had expected a small bequest, perhaps, or some sentimental item from her late mother's brother. Nothing more. Her uncle, Thomas Whitmore, had been a man consumed by his industrial empire. Factories in Manchester, shipping interests in Liverpool, investments that spanned from the coal mines of Wales to the textile mills of Yorkshire. He had never married, never showed interest in family beyond the occasional obligatory appearance at Christmas dinner. "Extraordinary in what manner, Mr. Pemberton?" The solicitor slid a document across the mahogany desk, its pages crackling with official seals and elaborate script. "He has named you his sole heir. Everything. The factories, the investments, the properties, the cash holdings, all of it passes to you, Lady Rosalind. Upon final accounting, the estate is valued at approximately £180,000. The room tilted slightly. Rosalind gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles whitening against the dark wood. £180,000. The sum was staggering, incomprehensible. Most gentlewomen of her acquaintance lived comfortably on £300 or £400 a year. She had just inherited enough to support herself in luxury for several lifetimes. I don't understand," she whispered. "Why me?" He had business partners, associates, surely. Your uncle's instructions were explicit and, may I say, somewhat unusual. Pemberton removed another document from his leather case. He left a private letter to be read to you upon the reading of the will. "With your permission?" Rosalind nodded, not trusting her voice. Pemberton broke the seal and began to read in his reedy voice. "My dear Rosalind, if you are hearing these words, then I have departed this world, and you have likely discovered that you are now a woman of considerable means. I know we were never close, a regret I carried but never remedied. I watched you from a distance, niece, and saw in you the same fierce independence and sharp mind that your mother possessed. You were never content to be merely ornamental, and for that I respected you. This fortune is not a gift, but a weapon. Use it wisely. Trust no one completely, and remember that wealth makes you powerful, but also vulnerable. Guard yourself, Rosalind. There are those who would take everything from you if given the chance. Your affectionate uncle, Thomas Whitmore." The silence that followed was profound. Rosalind stared at the papers before her, her mind racing. A weapon. Guard yourself. The words carried an ominous weight that made her skin prickle with unease. Mr. Pemberton was my uncle. Was he in some kind of danger before his death? The solicitor's expression grew even more troubled. "Your uncle died of an apoplexy, according to Dr. Matthews. However," he hesitated, choosing his words with evident care, "there were certain irregularities in his final weeks. Business disputes with his partner, Mr. Thornbury. Accusations of impropriety. Your uncle had begun making inquiries into discrepancies in the company accounts. And then, quite suddenly, he was gone. You think his death was not natural. I think, Lady Rosalind, that you should be very, very careful. The announcement of your inheritance will be in the Times tomorrow morning. By afternoon, you will be the most sought-after woman in London. Every bachelor, widower, and fortune hunter in England will descend upon you." Rosalind rose from her chair, pacing to the window. Below, Grosvenor Square stretched out in its orderly elegance. Neat gardens, fine carriages, the carefully curated world of London's elite. She had lived her entire life in this world, the orphaned daughter of a minor baronet, subsisting on a modest inheritance and the charity of distant relatives. She had learned to be invisible, to expect nothing, to want nothing. Now everything had changed. "What do you recommend, Mr. Pemberton?" "Marry, quickly, to a man with a respected name and the social standing to protect you from the vultures. Your fortune will need proper management, and a husband can provide legal protection that you cannot achieve alone as an unmarried woman." The familiar bitterness rose in her throat. Of course, a woman, no matter how wealthy, was still considered incomplete without a man's guidance. The law itself proclaimed it. Upon marriage, everything she owned would become her husband's property. £180,000, and she would have no legal control over a single penny of it. "I will consider your advice," she said coolly, though inside her mind was already forming plans. If she must marry, it would be on her terms. She would find a man who needed her more than she needed him, someone she could trust because his motivations were transparent. She would find a man who would accept a business arrangement rather than pretend at affection. The news spread through London society with the speed of wildfire through dry timber. By the following evening, Rosalind's small townhouse on the unfashionable edge of Mayfair had been visited by no fewer than 7 prospective suitors, each more transparently mercenary than the last. They arrived with practiced charm and calculated compliments, their eyes assessing her worth with the cold precision of men purchasing livestock at market. She turned them all away. On the 3rd day, the accidents began. The first was subtle, a loose wheel on her carriage that her driver discovered just before departure. He attributed it to poor maintenance, though Rosalind had noticed the shiny scratches on the metal, as if tools had recently been applied. The second was more concerning, a shelf in her library collapsing just moments after she had stood beneath it, sending heavy volumes crashing to the floor where her head had been seconds before. The third incident removed all doubt. Rosalind had accepted an invitation to Lady Pembroke's evening musical, largely because refusing all social engagements would only fuel more speculation. She wore her finest morning attire, a gown of black silk with jet beading that caught the lamplight, and steeled herself for an evening of whispered gossip and calculated approaches from London's fortune-hunting population. The musicale was held in Lady Pembroke's grand drawing-room, where gilt chairs had been arranged in neat rows before a pianoforte. Rosalind found herself seated near the back, flanked by elderly matrons who eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and envy. The performance began, a young lady of mediocre talent attacking a Mozart sonata with more enthusiasm than skill. Halfway through the second movement, Rosalind felt an overwhelming wave of nausea. The room began to spin, her vision blurring at the edges. She gripped the chair, her heart racing with sudden, inexplicable panic. The music became distorted, echoing strangely in her ears. Poison. The thought arrived with crystalline clarity. The tea she had accepted upon arrival, she had been the only one offered that particular cup, brought to her personally by a servant she did not recognize. With trembling hands, she rose from her seat, mumbling an excuse about feeling unwell. The elderly woman beside her tutted disapprovingly, but Rosalind barely heard. She stumbled toward the doors leading to the terrace, desperate for fresh air, for escape from the suffocating room. The night air struck her face like a blessing. She grasped the stone balustrade, breathing deeply, fighting the urge to vomit. Below, Lady Pembroke's gardens stretched into darkness, lit by scattered torches that flickered in the October wind. "You need a doctor." The voice came from her left, a man's voice, low and measured. Rosalind turned, her vision still swimming, and saw a figure emerge from the shadows of the terrace. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in evening clothes that had seen better days. As he stepped into the light, she registered dark hair, grey eyes, and a face that was striking rather than handsome. Strong features marked by experience, and something that looked like carefully controlled desperation. "I need nothing from you, sir," she managed, though her voice wavered. "You've been poisoned. The symptoms are unmistakable. I've seen them before." He moved closer, and she noticed the slight wear on his coat cuffs, the boots that had been polished to hide their age. "A gentleman fallen on hard times. How much did you drink?" Only a few sips." "Who are you?" "Viscount Cartwright, and you are Lady Rosalind Whitmore, the most talked-about woman in London." His expression was grim. "Someone just tried to kill you." The blunt statement, delivered with such certainty, made her knees buckle. He caught her arm, steadying her with a firm grip. "We need to get you away from here. If they failed this time, they'll try again." "Can you walk?" "I think so." "But why would you—" "Because I'm about to make you a proposition, Lady Rosalind, and I'd prefer you alive to hear it." Despite the poison clouding her thoughts, despite the terror and confusion of the past few days, Rosalind found herself almost laughing at the audacity. "You choose this moment to make advances, Lord Cartwright." "Not advances. Business." He kept his hand on her arm, guiding her toward the terrace steps. "I need your money. You need protection. I'm proposing a marriage of pure convenience, one that benefits us both." They reached the garden path, moving away from the lights of the house. Rosalind's head was beginning to clear, though her stomach still churned. She studied this stranger who had appeared from the shadows with such an outrageous proposal. "You're very direct, my lord. I can't afford not to be. My estate is mortgaged to the hilt, my creditors are circling, and I have exactly 6 weeks before I lose everything my family has held for 200 years. I need capital. You need a husband whose motivations are transparent, who won't pretend affection while plotting to control your fortune. And what makes you think I need protection? Perhaps I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. In the torchlight, his expression was neither kind nor cruel, but painfully honest. "Because someone just tried to poison you at a public event, Lady Rosalind. Because your carriage was sabotaged 2 days ago. Yes, I've been watching you. Because you inherited a fortune that makes you a target for every desperate man in England, and the law provides you almost no protection without a husband's name. You've been watching me? I've been considering my options. I won't lie to you. I'm desperate. But I'm also honourable, or at least I try to be. I would never harm you, never restrict your freedom beyond what society demands. You would have full access to your fortune through appropriate legal arrangements. I would ask only enough to save my estate and repay my debts. In return, you would have my name, my protection, and the social standing of a viscountess." Rosalind leaned against a stone column, her mind racing almost as fast as her heart. It was insane. She had known this man for all of 5 minutes, and yet his very desperation made him trustworthy in a way that the smooth-talking suitors were not. He needed her money, yes, but he stated it plainly, rather than hiding behind flowery compliments and false affection. "You don't even know me, Lord Cartwright. I know you're intelligent. You saw through every fortune hunter who came calling this week and sent them away. I know you're independent. You've lived on your own terms despite society's expectations. I know you're in danger, and I know I can protect you better than anyone else currently offering. Why you? What makes you qualified to protect me?" A shadow crossed his face. "I spent 6 years in Her Majesty's army before my father died, and I inherited the title. I know how to recognize threats. I know how to fight. And I have nothing left to lose except the one thing I'm trying to save, my family's legacy." The music from inside the house reached them faintly, accompanied by polite applause. The musicale was ending. Soon people would notice her absence, would come looking. If I were to consider this arrangement, Rosalind said slowly, I would require absolute honesty. Full disclosure of your debts, your obligations, everything. I would require legal agreements protecting my interests, and I would require your word that this marriage would remain what you claim. A business transaction, nothing more. Something flickered in his grey eyes. Relief, perhaps, or calculation. You have my word. I'll have my solicitor draw up whatever agreements you require. You'll have complete transparency. I haven't agreed yet, Lord Cartwright. No, but you will, he offered his arm, because you're practical, Lady Rosalind, and you recognize a fair bargain when you see one. Now, let me escort you home before whoever poisoned you realizes their attempt failed." As they walked through the garden toward the street where his modest carriage waited, Rosalind felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Marriage to a stranger, a business arrangement devoid of affection. It was everything society said a woman should not want. But society had also tried to poison her 3 days after she became wealthy. Perhaps Lord Cartwright was right. Perhaps this was exactly what she needed. "I'll give you my answer in 3 days," she said, as he helped her into the carriage, "after I've verified your claims and consulted my own solicitor." Fair enough. He stepped back, not attempting to join her in the carriage, another point in his favor. "I'll call on you Thursday afternoon with all my financial documents. And Lady Rosalind, be careful what you eat or drink between now and then." The carriage pulled away, leaving him standing in the shadows. Rosalind leaned back against the worn velvet seats, her mind whirling with possibilities and dangers. She had come to the musical as a target, vulnerable and alone. She might leave it as a woman with a plan. The question was whether that plan would save her, or condemn them both to something far worse than poverty or death. But as the carriage rattled through the London streets, past the elegant facades hiding desperate secrets, Rosalind found herself thinking less about the danger, and more about the grey-eyed Viscount who had appeared from the shadows with an impossible proposition. A marriage of necessity, a union without love. It should have felt like a prison sentence. Instead, it felt strangely like hope. The investigation took exactly 2 days. Rosalind's solicitor, Mr. Pemberton, returned to Whitmore House on Wednesday afternoon with a folder thick with documents and an expression that suggested he had uncovered secrets he wished he could forget. He settled into the chair across from her desk with the careful movements of a man bearing heavy news. Lord Cartwright was truthful about his circumstances, Pemberton began, spreading papers across the polished mahogany. Brutally so, in fact. The Cartwright estate, properly called Cartwright Hall, located in Hampshire, is mortgaged for £23,000. He owes an additional £8,000 to various creditors in London. His annual income from the estate, which was once considerable, has dwindled to barely £300 due to mismanagement by his late father and several failed harvests. Rosalind studied the documents, her finger tracing the columns of debt, and his character, impeccable by all accounts. He served with distinction in the Crimean campaign, mentioned in dispatches twice for bravery, returned home when his father died 4 years ago to discover the estate in ruins. He's been fighting a losing battle ever since. Pemberton paused, adjusting his spectacles. "Lady Rosalind, if I may speak frankly, please do. This is not the match you deserve. You could have any eligible man in England, men with fortunes equal to your own, men with higher titles, men who could offer you, men who would pretend affection while legally seizing control of everything I own." Rosalind interrupted quietly. "Men who might smile at me while plotting my convenient demise once the marriage settlements are signed? No, Mr. Pemberton. I'll take the honest fortune hunter over the charming murderer any day." The solicitor sighed. "You've made up your mind, then?" "I have. Draw up a marriage settlement with the following terms. Lord Cartwright receives £30,000 immediately upon marriage, enough to clear his debts and restore his estate. I retain control of the remaining fortune through a trust that he cannot access without my written consent. The trust will provide him an annual allowance of £1,000 for household expenses. Should I predecease him without children, everything returns to my designated heirs, not to him." Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "Those are extraordinarily favourable terms for you, my lady. Most unusual in a marriage settlement. Lord Cartwright is desperate enough to accept them. And Mr. Pemberton, include a clause stating that should any harm befall me under suspicious circumstances, all funds are immediately frozen and subjected to investigation. I want him to have every possible motivation to keep me alive and well. You don't trust him. I trust his desperation. I trust that £30,000 and a stable income is worth more to him than whatever he might gain from my death." Rosalind folded her hands. "Arrange a meeting with Lord Cartwright for tomorrow morning. If he agrees to these terms, we'll marry by special license within the week." Thursday morning arrived grey and cold, with rain lashing against the windows of Whitmore House. Adrian Cartwright arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, accompanied by his own solicitor. a shabby man named Mr. Green, who looked as financially distressed as his client. They sat in Rosalind's drawing room while Pemberton outlined the marriage settlement in excruciating legal detail. Rosalind watched Adrian's face as the terms were explained. He remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable, though she noticed his hands tightening almost imperceptibly on the arms of his chair when Pemberton reached the section about control of the fortune remaining with her. When Pemberton finished, silence filled the room. Rain drummed against the windows. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily. "Those terms are acceptable," Adrian said finally, his voice level. "With one addition." Rosalind felt her spine stiffen. "What addition?" "A clause stating that you retain the right to end the arrangement after 5 years if you choose. An annulment or legal separation with the original 30,000 remaining mine, but all additional funds and properties reverting to you." He met her gaze directly. "I won't trap you in this marriage forever, Lady Rosalind. 5 years gives me time to restore the estate and establish stable income. After that, if you wish to be free of me, you should have that option." The offer surprised her so thoroughly that for a moment she could only stare. Mr. Pemberton looked equally shocked, his pen hovering over the document. "That's, most irregular, Lord Cartwright," Pemberton managed, "and rather disadvantageous to yourself. Perhaps. But it's fair." Adrian's grey eyes remained steady on Rosalind's face. "This is a business arrangement, as we agreed. Business contracts have terms and endpoints. I see no reason a marriage contract should be different, provided both parties benefit and neither is harmed." Rosalind found herself reassessing the man before her. He wore the same slightly worn evening coat from the musicale, his dark hair neatly combed but lacking the fashionable styling of London gentlemen. Everything about him spoke of controlled desperation and fierce pride. Yet here he was, offering her an escape route from a marriage he desperately needed. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why give me that option when you have nothing to gain from it? Because I remember what it feels like to be trapped, Lady Rosalind. After my father died, I inherited not just an estate but a prison of debt and obligation I never chose. I won't do that to you, no matter how convenient it might be for me." He leaned forward slightly. "I need your money. I won't pretend otherwise. But I don't need to own you to get it." The words hung in the air between them, more intimate than any declaration of affection could have been. In that moment, Rosalind made her decision. "Add the clause, Mr. Pemberton. We'll sign today." They were married 4 days later in a small church in Bloomsbury, with only the solicitors and 2 servants as witnesses. Rosalind wore a simple dress of pearl grey silk, still in half-mourning for her uncle, though the prescribed period was not yet complete. Society would talk, but society had already been talking since her inheritance was announced. Adrian wore his military dress uniform, the only formal attire he owned that wasn't threadbare. He spoke his vows in a steady voice, slipping a plain gold band onto her finger with hands that didn't shake. Rosalind repeated her own vows, feeling the weight of the moment. A marriage without love, entered into with clear eyes and explicit terms. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Adrian kissed her cheek rather than her lips, a gesture of respect rather than possession. It should have felt cold, businesslike. Instead, it felt strangely like the beginning of something she couldn't quite name. The wedding breakfast was held at Whitmore House, a modest affair of cold meats, cheese and wine. Pemberton presented Adrian with a bank draft for £30,000. Adrian stared at the paper for a long moment, his jaw tight, before carefully folding it and placing it in his coat pocket. "Thank you," he said to Rosalind, the words carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. "It's what we agreed upon," she replied, though her chest felt oddly tight. "You'll use it wisely. Every penny will go to debts and estate improvements. You'll have full accounting." He paused, then added, "We should leave for Cartwright Hall tomorrow. London isn't safe for you. You think whoever tried to poison me will try again. I think your cousin Henry has been asking questions about your inheritance. I think your uncle's business partner, Mr. Thornbury, has been seen meeting with several unsavoury characters, and I think the farther we are from London, the better." His expression darkened. "At least at Cartwright Hall I'll know who's in the house and what they're doing." Rosalind nodded slowly. She had been so focused on the marriage itself that she'd almost forgotten the danger that precipitated it. Very well. I'll have my things packed tonight. They departed London the following morning in Adrian's worn carriage, now slightly improved with new horses, purchased from the marriage settlement funds. The journey to Hampshire took most of the day, the autumn landscape rolling past in shades of gold and brown. They sat across from each other in the carriage, an awkward silence stretching between them. Finally, Adrian spoke. I should warn you about the state of the house. It's not what you're accustomed to. I don't require luxury, Lord Cartwright. Adrian, we're married now. You should call me Adrian. Adrian, then, and you should call me Rosalind. He nodded, though his expression remained guarded. The house is structurally sound, but it needs work. Repairs, updates, staff. The servants who remained are loyal but few. A housekeeper, Mrs. Hodge, a butler named Patterson, 2 maids and a cook. The grounds are overgrown. Several rooms are closed off to save on heating. We'll remedy that now. With proper funds, the estate can be restored. Yes. He looked out the window, his profile sharp against the fading light. I never thought I'd save it this way. By marrying for money. By accepting charity. The words were bitter. My father would have been appalled. Your father is the one who created this situation, Rosalind pointed out. From what I understand, he's the one who mortgaged the estate and made poor investments. Adrian's laugh was short and humorless, true enough. My father was excellent at 2 things, gambling and drinking. He was spectacularly bad at everything else, including being a father. He turned back to face her. I'm sorry, that was inappropriate. Honesty is never inappropriate between us. That was our agreement, remember? Something softened in his expression. Yes, I remember. They fell silent again, but it felt less uncomfortable now, more like a shared understanding. As darkness fell and the carriage lamps were lit, Rosalind found herself studying her new husband in the flickering light. There was a hardness to him, born of military service and financial struggle, but beneath it she sensed something else, honor perhaps, or simply exhaustion from fighting too many battles alone. She had married a stranger, but perhaps she thought there were worse foundations for a marriage than mutual honesty and clear expectations. Cartwright Hall materialized out of the darkness like something from a Gothic novel, a sprawling manor house of grey stone, its windows mostly dark, its grounds shadowed and wild. As the carriage approached, Rosalind could see the signs of neglect, overgrown hedges, a fountain thick with dead leaves, statuary stained with moss and age. But beneath the decay, she could also see the bones of something magnificent. The architecture was Elizabethan, all graceful proportions and elegant stonework. The entrance hall, when they entered, revealed a soaring ceiling with carved wooden beams, a grand staircase with elaborately turned balusters, and walls that must once have been hung with fine tapestries. Now the walls were bare, except for faded rectangles where paintings had once hung, presumably sold to pay debts. The furniture that remained was covered in dust sheets. The air smelled of disuse and damp. Mrs. Hodge, the housekeeper, emerged from the back of the house, a stout woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a capable manner. She dropped into a curtsy. My lord, my lady. Welcome home. Mrs. Hodge, this is Lady Cartwright, Adrian said. She'll be making changes to the household. You're to follow her instructions as you would mine. The housekeeper's gaze swept over Rosalind with frank assessment. Of course, my lord. I've prepared the Viscountess's chambers. Shall I show her ladyship up? Please, Adrian turned to Rosalind. I'll have your trunks brought up. We can discuss household matters in the morning. Rosalind followed Mrs. Hodge up the grand staircase, down a long corridor lined with more absent portraits, to a suite of rooms at the east end of the house. The Viscountess's chambers were spacious, but clearly hadn't been occupied in years. Dust motes danced in the lamplight. The furniture was good quality but outdated by several decades. This was Lord Cartwright's mother's room, Mrs. Hodge explained, as she lit candles throughout the space. She died when his lordship was 12. The room's been closed since. How long have you been at Cartwright Hall, Mrs. Hodge? 32 years, my lady. I came as a young maid, worked my way up to housekeeper. I've served 3 viscounts, the old lord, his son, and now the current lord. Her expression softened. Master Adrian is a good man. He's tried so hard to save this place, then we'll save it together. Rosalind moved to the window, pulling back the heavy curtains. Beyond the glass, she could see nothing but darkness and the faint outline of gardens gone wild. "I'll need a complete inventory of the house, Mrs. Hodge. Every room, every piece of furniture, everything that needs repair or replacement. Can you provide that?" "Yes, my lady, though it'll make for grim reading. Grim can be fixed. Impossible cannot." Rosalind turned back to the housekeeper. "I also need to know the staff situation. Who do we have? Who do we need?" Mrs. Hodge's face brightened with something like hope. "Well now, my lady, if we're truly restoring the house, we'll need at least 6 more maids, 2 footmen, another cook for the kitchens, stable hands, groundskeepers, a proper lady's maid for yourself." They talked for nearly an hour, Mrs. Hodge's initial reserve melting as Rosalind asked practical questions and made careful notes. When the housekeeper finally departed, Rosalind sat at the dressing table studying her reflection in the tarnished mirror. Lady Cartwright, Viscountess, married to a man she barely knew, living in a decaying manor house, hunted by unknown enemies in London. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt alive in a way she'd never experienced before. This was hers now. Not through inheritance or charity, but through her own choice and negotiation. This house, this estate, this strange marriage of convenience, she would make something of it. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Adrian entered, carrying her smaller trunk himself rather than waiting for servants. He set it down near the wardrobe, then stood awkwardly in the doorway as if uncertain whether he had the right to be in her chambers. "I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed," he said. "Mrs. Hodge has been very helpful. Thank you. And I wanted to clarify the sleeping arrangements." His expression was carefully neutral. "My chambers are on the opposite end of this corridor. I won't intrude on your privacy unless you explicitly request my presence. This marriage is a business arrangement. I meant what I said about not trapping you." Rosalind stood, crossing to face him. In the candlelight, his features seemed less harsh, more human. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the strain of years spent fighting a losing battle. "I appreciate your discretion," she said quietly. "But Adrian, we're partners in this endeavor. You don't need to treat me like a stranger in your own home." Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or gratitude. "Partners. Yes, I can work with that." "Good. Then tomorrow, you'll show me the estate. I want to see everything. The lands, the farms, the tenants, the repairs needed. If I'm to invest my fortune in saving this place, I need to understand what I'm saving. Of course." He hesitated, then added, "Rosalind, thank you for all of this. I know it's not what you would have chosen if circumstances were different. Perhaps not. But I'm beginning to think it might be exactly what I needed." She offered him a small smile. "Good night, Adrian." "Good night." He departed, closing the door softly behind him. Rosalind prepared for bed, her thoughts churning with plans and possibilities. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old windows and moaning through the eaves of Cartwright Hall. She slept that night in a stranger's house, wearing a stranger's ring, bound by law to a man she'd known for less than a week. And yet, as she drifted into dreams, she felt safer than she had in months. It was only later, much later, that she would realize safety and happiness were not the same thing at all. Autumn deepened over Hampshire with breathtaking swiftness. The trees surrounding Cartwright Hall blazed gold and crimson before surrendering their leaves to the increasingly bitter wind. Rosalind had been married for 6 weeks, and in that time the estate had begun its slow transformation from genteel decay to cautious renewal. The changes were visible everywhere. New servants bustled through corridors that had stood silent for years. Gardeners attacked the overgrown grounds with shears and determination. Craftsmen repaired windows, replastered walls, and restored the elegant bones of the house to something approaching their former glory. The fountain in the front courtyard had been cleared, and now burbled cheerfully, its stone nymphs finally freed from their shroud of dead leaves and moss. Rosalind stood in what would become the morning room, once her restoration was complete, watching workers replace damaged wainscoting. She wore a practical dress of dark blue wool, her hair pulled back in a simple chignon, ink stains on her fingers from the morning's correspondence with suppliers and contractors. She had discovered an unexpected talent for estate management, a satisfaction in seeing tangible results from careful planning and investment. "My lady?" Mrs. Hodge appeared in the doorway, slightly breathless. "His lordship has returned from the northern tenant farms. He's asking if you'll join him in the library." Of course, Rosalind set down her clipboard, brushing dust from her skirts. Over the past weeks, she and Adrian had fallen into a comfortable rhythm of partnership. Mornings were spent on separate tasks, he managing the agricultural aspects of the estate, she overseeing the house restoration. Afternoons often found them in the library, reviewing accounts and making plans over tea. It was businesslike, efficient, exactly what they had agreed upon. So why did she find herself looking forward to those afternoon meetings with increasing anticipation? The library at Cartwright Hall was one of the few rooms that had retained most of its original splendor. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes accumulated over generations. A massive fireplace dominated the 4th wall, and before it sat 2 wing-backed chairs separated by a small table, their customary meeting place. Adrian stood by the window when she entered, still in his riding clothes, his dark hair wind-blown. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and she noticed immediately that something was wrong. His expression was troubled, his jaw tight. "What's happened?" she asked, moving toward him. "I received a letter from my solicitor in London. Apparently your cousin Henry has been making inquiries about our marriage settlement." He crossed to the table, picking up a folded piece of paper. "He's claiming the marriage was contracted under duress, that I coerced you while you were vulnerable after your uncle's death." Rosalind felt ice slide down her spine. "That's absurd. We have witnesses, signed documents. He's also suggesting that your uncle's will should be challenged, that the fortune should have been divided among all blood relatives, not given solely to you." Adrian's voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the anger beneath. "He's retained a barrister, a very expensive one. He doesn't have the funds for expensive barristers, no, but Mr. Thornbury does." Adrian handed her the letter. "My solicitor suspects they're working together. Thornbury provides the money, Henry provides the legal standing as a blood relative." Rosalind read the letter, her hands trembling slightly. The implications were clear. If Henry succeeded in challenging the will, or if he could prove the marriage was invalid, everything would be thrown into chaos. The money Adrian had already spent on estate restoration could be reclaimed. The debts he'd paid could be called in again. They could lose everything. "We need to return to London," she said quietly. "We need to fight this. Not yet." Adrian moved closer, his expression intense. "Think about it, Rosalind. The moment we return to London, we are vulnerable again. Here, at least, I can protect you. The estate is isolated, the servants are loyal, and anyone approaching the house can be seen from a mile away. But if we don't respond to Henry's challenge, my solicitor will respond. We have legal representation. But I won't risk taking you back to London while someone is still trying to kill you." His voice dropped. "That poisoning at Lady Pembroke's wasn't the last attempt, was it?" She stared at him. "What do you mean?" "The shelf that collapsed in your library. The loose carriage wheel. I've been reviewing the circumstances of your uncle's death, and Rosalind, the similarities are troubling. He had a series of accidents in the weeks before his apoplexy, too. A fall downstairs that was attributed to gout. Food poisoning from supposedly spoiled fish, a fire in his study that was blamed on a careless servant. The room seemed to tilt slightly. You think they murdered him? I think someone wanted him dead and made it look natural. I think that same someone, or several someones, wants you dead too. And I think they're getting desperate now that you're married, and the money is harder to access." Rosalind sank into one of the wing-backed chairs, her mind racing. "So Henry's legal challenge is just another tactic, or a distraction. Keep us focused on the courts while they arrange another accident." Adrian knelt before her chair, bringing his face level with hers. "I know this isn't what you signed up for. Business arrangement, you said. Partnership. Not being hunted by murderers and conspirators. You're not responsible for their actions, Adrian. No, but I'm responsible for your safety. That's part of our agreement, whether we wrote it into the contract or not." His grey eyes were fierce. "I won't let them hurt you, Rosalind. I promise you that." The intensity of his words, the proximity of his presence, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. She found herself noticing details she'd somehow overlooked before. The slight scar above his left eyebrow, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the calluses on his hands from manual work on the estate. When had he stopped being simply a convenient husband and become this? "Thank you," she managed, her voice not quite steady, "for caring about my welfare." Something shifted in his expression, a softness that made her breath catch. "It's not difficult," he said quietly. "Caring about you." The words hung between them, far too intimate for their businesslike arrangement. Rosalind became acutely aware that his hands rested on the arms of her chair, that he was close enough that she could see the faint stubble on his jaw, that her heart was beating considerably faster than the situation warranted. This was dangerous. This was not what they'd agreed to. She stood abruptly, forcing him to step back. "We should review the accounts. I've received estimates from the roofers for the East Wing." If Adrian noticed her sudden retreat, he didn't comment. "Of course. Let me fetch the ledgers." They spent the next 2 hours in careful discussion of practical matters: roofing costs, tenant rent adjustments, plans for next spring's planting. It was safe, rational, the kind of interaction that had defined their marriage thus far. But something had shifted, and they both knew it. That evening, Rosalind found herself unable to sleep. She paced her chambers, still thinking about Adrian's words in the library. The revelation about her uncle's supposed accidents, the realization that she was still in danger, despite the marriage and the distance from London. And beneath it all, that moment of dangerous intimacy, when he'd knelt before her chair and said caring about her wasn't difficult. Finally, frustrated with her own restlessness, she wrapped a shawl over her nightgown and ventured into the corridor. The house was silent except for the usual creaks and settles of old buildings. She made her way down to the library, thinking to find a book that might help her sleep. The door was ajar, firelight flickering from within. She pushed it open and found Adrian there, still dressed, sitting in his usual chair with a glass of brandy and a sheaf of papers spread before him. He looked up at her entrance, surprise crossing his face. "Rosalind. Is something wrong?" "I couldn't sleep." She gestured to the bookshelves. "I thought I'd find something to read." "At midnight in your nightclothes?" A slight smile touched his lips. "We're definitely breaking society's rules now. Society's rules seem rather pointless when someone is trying to murder me." "Fair point." He set down his glass. "What kind of book helps you sleep? Poetry? Philosophy? Gothic romances?" "History, actually. The more tedious and detailed, the better." She moved to the shelves, running her fingers along the spines. "What are you working on so late?" "Trying to trace your uncle's business dealings. If we can prove Thornbury was embezzling or otherwise defrauding the company, it might explain why they wanted him dead, and why they want you out of the way now." Rosalind turned to face him. "You're investigating a potential murder. That's dangerous, Adrian. So is doing nothing while they plot your demise." He shuffled the papers. "I've found some irregularities, shipments that don't match the ledgers, payments to companies that don't seem to exist. It's circumstantial, but it's a start." She crossed to his chair, looking down at the documents spread across the table. The numbers and names swam before her eyes, but she could see the pattern he was describing, the gaps, the inconsistencies. "You're good at this," she said softly. "The investigation, military training. You learn to spot patterns, anomalies, things that don't fit." He looked up at her, and in the firelight his expression was unguarded. "Rosalind, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart stuttered. "What?" "When I proposed this marriage, I believed I could maintain the distance we agreed upon. I thought I could treat this as purely business." He stood, facing her. "I was wrong." "Adrian, let me finish." He took a breath. "Over these past weeks, watching you bring this house back to life, seeing your intelligence and strength, sharing meals and conversations, and the daily work of running the estate, I've come to care for you. Genuinely care for you in ways that go far beyond our agreement." The admission hung in the air between them, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Rosalind's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her shawl. "This isn't what we planned," she whispered. "I know, and I won't press you for anything you're not willing to give. Our agreement stands. In 5 years, if you want your freedom, you'll have it. But I needed to be honest with you, as we promised we would be. His expression was pained. I'm falling in love with my wife, Rosalind, and I don't know what to do about it. She should step back, should remind him of the boundaries they'd established, should protect herself from the vulnerability of caring too much. Instead, she found herself reaching out, her hand finding his. You're not alone in that confusion. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. Rosalind, I don't know when it happened, she continued, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Perhaps it was watching you work alongside the tenant farmers, treating them with dignity and respect. Perhaps it was the way you've honored every promise you made to me, or perhaps it was simply this, the quiet evenings, the shared purpose, the feeling of finally being seen as more than just a fortune to be acquired. You are so much more than that, he said fiercely. You're brilliant and brave and... She kissed him. It was impulsive, reckless, completely contrary to every careful plan she'd made. But his lips were warm against hers, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache. The kiss deepened, becoming something urgent and real, all the weeks of careful distance dissolving in a moment of shared honesty. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. We're making this very complicated, he murmured. It was always complicated. We were just pretending otherwise, and now... Rosalind pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes. Now we acknowledge the truth. This marriage is no longer just business, and we face whatever comes next together. A knock at the library door shattered the moment. They sprang apart as Mrs. Hodge entered, her expression troubled. My lord, my lady, forgive the intrusion, but there's a gentleman at the door. He claims to be Lady Cartwright's cousin, Mr. Henry Whitmore. He's demanding entry, and says he has urgent legal business to discuss. The warmth drained from Rosalind's body, replaced by ice-cold dread. Henry is here now at midnight. Adrian's expression had gone hard, all traces of softness vanishing. How many men with him? 2, my lord. They claim to be his solicitor and clerk, but... Mrs. Hodge hesitated. They don't look like legal men to me. They look like trouble. Tell Patterson to bar the doors and not open them under any circumstances. Adrian strode to the desk, pulling open a drawer to reveal a pistol. Then wake the male servants and have them arm themselves with whatever's available. Pokers, clubs, anything. Adrian, what are you doing? Rosalind asked, her voice shaking. Protecting you. If Henry wanted to discuss legal matters, he'd do so through proper channels during daylight hours. Coming here at midnight with hired muscle? He checked the pistol's load. That's not legal business, that's an attempt at intimidation or worse. From somewhere in the house they heard the sound of fists pounding on the main door, followed by Henry's voice, loud and slurred with drink. Open this door, cousin. I know you're in there. We need to talk about your fraudulent marriage. Adrian moved to Rosalind's side, his expression fierce. Go upstairs. Lock yourself in your chambers. Don't open the door for anyone except me or Mrs. Hodge. I won't hide while you face them alone. Rosalind. He gripped her shoulders. Please, I can't protect you and worry about you at the same time. Let me do what I'm trained to do. The fear in his eyes, the desperation to keep her safe, decided her. She nodded, rising on her toes to kiss him quickly. Be careful. Always. She fled the library, Mrs. Hodge at her heels. As they climbed the stairs, the pounding on the door grew more violent, accompanied by threats and demands. Rosalind reached her chambers and locked the door, her heart racing. Through the window she could see torches in the drive, 3 mounted figures, and was that a 4th lurking near the gardens? This was no legal visit, this was an attack. And downstairs the man she loved, God, when had that happened, was preparing to defend their home against enemies who would stop at nothing to seize her fortune. Rosalind pressed her hand against the cold glass, watching the torches circle the house like predators seeking entry. Whatever safety they'd found in their isolated estate, whatever growing affection had blossomed between them, it was all about to be tested. The question was whether their fragile new connection would survive what was coming, or whether, like so many things in her life, it would be destroyed before it had a chance to truly bloom. The siege lasted until dawn. From her window, Rosalind watched as Adrian and the male servants patrolled the perimeter of Cartwright Hall, armed with pistols, hunting rifles, and improvised weapons. Henry and his companions remained outside, alternating between shouted threats and attempted entries through various doors and windows. Each attempt was rebuffed, but the message was clear. They weren't leaving without what they'd come for. As the first grey light touched the horizon, the attackers finally withdrew, their horses disappearing down the long drive toward the main road. But Rosalind knew with cold certainty that this was not over. She found Adrian in the entrance hall, his face haggard with exhaustion, his shirt torn at the shoulder where he'd grappled with one of Henry's men who'd tried to force entry through the conservatory. Patterson, the elderly butler, was binding a cut on Adrian's forearm, while Mrs. Hodge directed the maids to sweep up broken glass from a shattered window. "How bad is it?" Rosalind asked, moving to Adrian's side. "Could have been worse. They were testing our defences more than attempting a serious assault." He winced as Patterson tightened the bandage. "But they'll be back. Better prepared next time." "Then we can't stay here." "No." Adrian's jaw tightened. "We need to go on the offensive. We need to find proof of what Thornbury and Henry have done, proof solid enough to bring to the authorities. Where would we even start?" "London. Your uncle's office, his papers, the company records." He stood, dismissing Patterson with a nod of thanks. "I know I said it wasn't safe there, but it's not safe here anymore either. At least in London, we'll have access to legal resources and witnesses." Rosalind's mind was already racing ahead. "My uncle kept a private study in his townhouse. When I inherited, I left everything as it was. I couldn't bear to sort through his things. But if there's evidence of embezzlement or fraud, it would be there." Adrian caught her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "We'll leave this afternoon. Pack only what's essential. I want to reach London before Henry realizes we've abandoned the estate. What about Cartwright Hall? The servants? Mrs. Hodge can manage in our absence. I'll leave Patterson armed and instruct him to send for the magistrate if Henry returns." His expression darkened. "Though I suspect Henry will follow us to London once he learns we've gone." They prepared hastily, throwing clothes and documents into trunks while servants scurried to ready the carriage. By early afternoon they were on the road, leaving Cartwright Hall behind in a cloud of dust and churned mud. The journey to London took 2 days, both of them tense and watchful. They stopped only at busy coaching inns where crowds provided safety, and Adrian insisted on checking their food before Rosalind touched it, paranoid about another poisoning attempt. During the long hours in the carriage, they discussed strategy. "If we can prove Thornbury was embezzling from your uncle's company, we can destroy his credibility," Adrian said, reviewing notes he'd made about the suspicious transactions. "Without Thornbury's money and influence, Henry's legal challenge collapses, but proving embezzlement means accessing the company books. Thornbury controls those now. He became majority shareholder after my uncle's death." "Did your uncle have a partner, someone else in the company who might have kept independent records?" Rosalind frowned, searching her memory. "There was a junior partner, Mr. Ashford. He and my uncle were at Cambridge together. He handled the shipping contracts while my uncle focused on manufacturing. Would he have reason to help us? Possibly. He always seemed uncomfortable around Thornbury. At my uncle's funeral he tried to speak with me privately, but Thornbury interrupted, and I never learned what he wanted to say." Adrian made a note. "Then Ashford is our first visit in London. If he suspects Thornbury of fraud, he might be willing to testify or provide documentation." The carriage hit a rut, jolting them both. Rosalind steadied herself against Adrian's shoulder, acutely aware of his warmth, the solid strength of him. Since that midnight kiss in the library, the dynamic between them had shifted irrevocably. Every casual touch now carried weight. Every shared glance held meaning. "Rosalind," Adrian said quietly, as if reading her thoughts, "when this is over, when we've dealt with Thornbury and Henry and you're safe again, we should talk about what happens next. With us." "What do you mean?" "I mean that this marriage has become something neither of us anticipated, and we need to decide if that's something we want to pursue, or if we should honor our original agreement and maintain distance." She looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability beneath his careful words. "You're giving me an out. Again, I'm giving you a choice. Always." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "I told you I was falling in love with you. That hasn't changed, But I won't trap you in something you never wanted just because circumstances threw us together. Adrian. She shifted to face him fully. I kissed you. Doesn't that tell you what I want? It tells me what you wanted in that moment. But moments pass, and you deserve time to be certain. We're in the middle of a crisis. Emotions run high. People make decisions under duress that they regret later. His consideration even now made her chest ache. You really would let me go, wouldn't you? Even after everything. If that's what would make you happy, yes. Your happiness matters more to me than my own comfort. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. But I'm hoping, God, I'm hoping, that when this is over, you'll choose to stay. Not because of our contract, but because you want to. Before Rosalind could answer, the carriage lurched to a sudden stop, throwing them both forward. Adrian was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the pistol he'd tucked in his coat. Stay here, he ordered, moving to open the carriage door. But Rosalind followed, refusing to be left behind. Outside, she saw their driver arguing with two mounted men blocking the road. Her blood ran cold as she recognized one of them, the same man who'd accompanied Henry to Cartwright Hall 2 nights ago. Lord Cartwright, the man called out, his voice mocking. Imagine meeting you here. Mr. Thornbury sends his regards and requests a word. Tell Thornbury if he wants conversation, he can make an appointment with my solicitor, Adrian replied coldly. I'm afraid Mr. Thornbury insists, and he's not a patient man. The rider pulled back his coat, revealing a pistol at his hip. You and Lady Cartwright will accompany us, peacefully, if you're wise. Adrian's hand tightened on his own weapon. And if we refuse, then things become unpleasant. For everyone, particularly for your lovely wife. Rosalind felt Adrian tense beside her, calculating odds and options. They were outnumbered on an open road with nowhere to run. Fighting would be suicidal. Where is Thornbury? Adrian demanded. Not far. A manor house he's rented nearby. All very civilized, I assure you. He simply wishes to discuss a business proposition. Business propositions don't typically require armed escorts. The man smiled unpleasantly. These are unusual circumstances. Now will you come peacefully, or must we resort to less pleasant methods of persuasion? Adrian looked at Rosalind, and in his eyes she saw fury and calculation warring with protective instinct. They both knew they had no real choice. Refusing would mean violence, and violence on an open road could end in tragedy. We'll come, Adrian said finally, his voice tight. But if you harm Lady Cartwright in any way, I will personally ensure you regret it. Threats already, my lord? And here I thought we were being so cordial. The rider gestured to his companion. James, lead the way. Lord and Lady Cartwright will follow in their carriage. And driver, don't try anything foolish. We'll be watching. They climbed back into the carriage, now flanked by armed riders. As they rolled forward, forced to follow their captors, Rosalind gripped Adrian's hand. What are we going to do? She whispered. Listen to what Thornbury has to say. Look for opportunities to escape. And if worst comes to worst, he pulled a small knife from his boot, pressing it into her palm. Hide this. Use it if you must. The weight of the blade in her hand felt both reassuring and terrifying. Adrian, I'm scared, so am I. He pulled her close, his lips brushing her temple. But we've survived everything else they've thrown at us. We'll survive this too. The manor house appeared after 20 minutes of tense travel. A handsome Georgian building surrounded by well-maintained grounds. Too respectable, too normal-looking to be the setting for whatever confrontation awaited them. They were escorted inside by their armed guards, through an elegant entrance hall and into a library where a fire burned cheerfully. And there, standing by the window with a glass of brandy, was a man Rosalind recognized from her uncle's funeral. Mr. Thornbury was perhaps 50, well-dressed with silver-streaked dark hair and the confident bearing of a successful businessman. He turned as they entered, his expression one of genial hospitality that didn't reach his cold eyes. Lady Cartwright, Lord Cartwright, how good of you to join me. He gestured to chairs arranged before the fire. Please sit. Can I offer refreshment? You can offer an explanation for kidnapping us, Adrian said sharply, remaining standing. Kidnapping? Such harsh language. I merely extended an invitation to discuss matters of mutual interest. Thornbury sipped his brandy. But very well. Let's dispense with pleasantries. Lady Cartwright, you possess something that belongs to me. I want it back. I possess nothing of yours, Rosalind said, forcing her voice to remain steady. Oh, but you do. £180,000 to be precise. Money that your late uncle stole from our partnership before his untimely death. My uncle stole nothing. The fortune was his to bequeath as he chose. Thornbury's smile turned cruel. Was it? Or did he build that fortune by embezzling from our joint ventures, by diverting profits that should have been split equally between us? Thomas Whitmore was many things, Lady Cartwright, but honest was not one of them. Adrian stepped forward. If you had evidence of embezzlement, you would have presented it to authorities. Instead, you've resorted to threats, violence, and conspiracy. That tells me everything I need to know about the validity of your claims. Oh, I have evidence. I have ledgers showing systematic fraud spanning 15 years. What I don't have is the patience to pursue this through courts that favor aristocratic titles over working men who built their fortunes through actual labor. Thornbury set down his glass. So I'm making you a simple offer. Return the money, all of it, and I'll let you both walk away. Refuse, and I'll destroy you both. The choice is yours. We choose to walk away right now, Adrian said, and we'll see you in court. I don't think so. Thornbury nodded to someone behind them. Rosalind turned to see Henry emerge from a side door, his face flushed with drink and spite. But it was the documents in his hands that made her blood freeze. You should have been nicer to me, cousin, Henry slurred. Should have shared the inheritance like family should. Now you'll lose everything, including your precious husband's reputation. He threw the papers onto the table before them. Rosalind picked them up with trembling hands, Adrian reading over her shoulder. They were forgeries, but convincing ones. Documents purporting to show that Adrian had conspired with her uncle to defraud the company. Letters allegedly in Adrian's handwriting promising to marry Rosalind and split the inheritance with Thornbury after her uncle's death. Bank records suggesting Adrian had received payments from her uncle's accounts before they were even married. It was all lies, but it was convincing enough to ruin them both. You see, Thornbury said softly, I've prepared for every contingency. If you take me to court, these documents become public. Lord Cartwright will be arrested for fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. You, Lady Cartwright, will be seen as either his accomplice or his dupe. Either way, your reputation is destroyed, your marriage invalidated, and your fortune becomes subject to seizure pending investigation. Rosalind sank into a chair, the room spinning. You've thought of everything. I've had months to plan. Since before your uncle's unfortunate accident. Thornbury's smile widened. Oh yes, that was my doing. Thomas discovered my embezzlement, threatened to expose me. I couldn't allow that. The apoplexy was easy enough to arrange. A little poison in his evening wine, administered over weeks until his heart simply gave out. No one suspected a thing. You're confessing to murder, Adrian said, his voice deadly quiet. To you, yes. Because you're never leaving this house to tell anyone. Thornbury gestured, and suddenly there were more men in the room, 6 of them, all armed. You have one final chance, Lady Cartwright. Sign over your fortune to me, all of it, and I'll let Lord Cartwright live. Refuse, and you'll both have tragic accidents. Choose quickly. Rosalind looked at Adrian, saw the fury and helplessness in his eyes. They were trapped, outmaneuvered by a man who had planned every detail of his conspiracy with ruthless precision. She had a choice to make: surrender everything she owned to save the man she loved, or refuse, and watch them both die. The knife Adrian had given her pressed against her leg, hidden in her boot. One chance. One desperate gamble. She met Thornbury's eyes and made her decision. I'll sign, Rosalind said, her voice hollow. No. Adrian grabbed her arm, his face pale with fury and fear. Rosalind, you can't. I won't watch you die. She pulled free, turning to Thornbury. You'll have the money, all of it. Just let him go. Thornbury's smile was triumphant. A wise choice, Lady Cartwright. Love makes us so wonderfully predictable, doesn't it? He snapped his fingers, and one of his men produced a document. Already prepared, of course, everything had been planned. Sign here. This transfers all assets, properties, and holdings to me, effective immediately. Adrian moved to block her path to the desk. Think about what you're doing. Once you sign, we have no leverage. He'll kill us both anyway. Perhaps, Rosalind said quietly, meeting his desperate gaze. "But this way at least one of us might survive, and Adrian, if you make it out of this, you'll still have Cartwright Hall. The 30,000 I gave you is already spent, already yours. The estate is safe. Damn the estate. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for. It's not your decision to make." She touched his face gently, memorizing every detail. "This is my fortune, my choice, and I choose you. I choose your life over everything else." She could see the moment his heart broke, reflected in his eyes. But she also saw him understand. There was no other way. Thornbury held all the power here. Refusing would mean both their deaths. This way, at least there was a chance. Rosalind moved to the desk, dipping the pen in ink with a hand that barely trembled. The document was comprehensive, brutal in its thoroughness. Every pound, every property, every investment, all transferred to Mr. Edmund Thornbury. £180,000 signed away with a few strokes of her pen. As she set down the pen, she felt strangely light, as if an enormous weight had lifted. The fortune that had brought her nothing but danger, that had made her a target, that had changed her entire life. It was gone now. She was back where she'd started, a woman with nothing but her wits and her will, and the man she loved if they could somehow survive the next few minutes. Thornbury picked up the signed document, examining it with satisfaction. "Excellent. Now, Lord Cartwright, if you'll just sign this complimentary document relinquishing any marital claim to the transferred funds—" "No." The word was flat, absolute. Adrian stood with his arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. Thornbury's smile faded. "I beg your pardon?" "You have what you wanted from Rosalind. I'm not signing anything. Then you're of no use to me." Thornbury nodded to his men. "Take him outside. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong." Two of the armed men moved toward Adrian. Rosalind's hand went to her boot, fingers closing around the small knife. But what could one blade do against 6 armed men? Then chaos erupted. The library door burst open with a crash of splintering wood. Men poured in. Not Thornbury's thugs, but constables in uniform, led by a man in magistrate's robes. Behind them came someone Rosalind recognized, Mr. Ashford, her uncle's junior partner, his face grim with determination. "Edmund Thornbury," the magistrate announced, "you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and the murder of Thomas Whitmore." Thornbury's face went white, then red with rage. "This is absurd. You have no evidence. On the contrary." Mr. Ashford stepped forward, holding up a leather-bound ledger. "I have 15 years of evidence. Every fraudulent transaction, every embezzled pound, every forged document. Thomas gave me copies of everything before he died. He suspected you were planning something desperate. He was right. And we have something even better," the magistrate added. "Confession." Every word spoken in this room for the past 20 minutes was heard by constables stationed outside that window. He pointed to the casement behind Thornbury. "Confessing to murder, threatening witnesses, extortion. Shall I continue?" Rosalind felt her knees buckle with relief. Adrian caught her, pulling her against his chest as constables moved to restrain Thornbury and his men. Henry, she noticed, was trying to slip toward the door, but a constable blocked his path. "Mr. Henry Whitmore," the magistrate said, "you're also under arrest as an accomplice to fraud and conspiracy." "I didn't know about the murder," Henry protested, his voice rising to a panicked whine. "I just wanted what was rightfully mine. The inheritance should have been divided. You'll have your chance to make that argument in court. Though I suspect the judge will be less sympathetic, given your participation in tonight's attempted extortion." As the prisoners were led away in chains, Rosalind turned to Mr. Ashford, still processing what had happened. "You knew. All this time you knew what Thornbury was doing. I suspected, but I couldn't prove it. Not until your uncle left me those ledgers in a sealed letter, to be opened only if he died under suspicious circumstances." Ashford's expression was pained. "I'm sorry, Lady Cartwright. I should have come forward sooner, but I was afraid. Thornbury had threatened my family, and I was a coward." "You're here now," Adrian said, his arm still around Rosalind's shoulders. "That's what matters. But how did you find us? I've been watching Thornbury for weeks, waiting for him to make a mistake. When I saw your carriage forced off the road, I followed at a distance and sent for the magistrate. We've been outside for the past 15 minutes, listening to everything." Ashford shook his head in disgust. He confessed to it all. The poisoning, the embezzlement, even the murder. His arrogance was his undoing. The magistrate approached with the document Rosalind had just signed. Lady Cartwright, this transfer of assets was obtained under duress and threat of violence. It is void, of course. Your fortune remains yours. Rosalind stared at the paper, at her signature still wet with ink. The fortune she'd surrendered to save Adrian's life was hers again, just like that. The weight she'd felt lifting returned with crushing force. "Thank you," she managed, though the words felt inadequate. They were escorted back to their carriage, given constables as guards for the journey into London proper. As the horses pulled away from the cursed manor house, Rosalind finally allowed herself to collapse against Adrian, the terror and adrenaline of the past hours draining away. "We're safe," she whispered. "It's over." Yes. But Adrian's voice was strained, and when she looked up at him, his expression was troubled. "What's wrong?" "Thornbury is arrested. Henry, too. The conspiracy is exposed. We won. You were willing to give up everything for me." He stared out the window, his jaw tight. £180,000. Your independence, your security, your future. You would have signed it all away. Of course I would have. I love you, Adrian. What good is a fortune if you're dead? And what good am I if I can't protect you without you having to save yourself? He turned to face her, and she saw anguish in his eyes. "Don't you understand, Rosalind? I failed you completely. You had to sacrifice everything because I couldn't keep you safe. That's not what happened. It's exactly what happened. I promised to protect you when we married. That was the whole point of this arrangement, and when it mattered most, you were the one protecting me." Rosalind grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me. We survived because we worked together, because you taught me to hide a knife in my boot, because you negotiated time by refusing to sign Thornbury's document, because Mr. Ashford followed us and called the authorities. None of us did this alone. You would have lost everything because of me. No, I would have chosen you over money, because money means nothing compared to your life." She kissed him fiercely. "I love you, you stubborn man. I choose you. And I need you to choose yourself too, to stop seeing yourself as a failure because you couldn't single-handedly defeat a conspiracy years in the making." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway." She tried to lighten the mood, but she could feel something was still wrong, a tension in him that wouldn't ease. They reached London as darkness fell, going directly to Rosalind's townhouse on the edge of Mayfair. The house was dark and cold. She'd closed it up when they married, but servants were hastily summoned, fires lit, rooms aired. That night they should have celebrated, should have revelled in their victory, their survival, their love finally acknowledged and reciprocated. Instead, Adrian barely spoke through dinner. He sat across from her at the small dining table, pushing food around his plate, lost in thoughts he wouldn't share. Finally, Rosalind set down her fork. "Talk to me. Please. I've been thinking about our agreement. The 5-year clause." Her stomach dropped. "What about it? Perhaps we should invoke it now, or at least, perhaps you should seriously consider whether this marriage is what you truly want." "Adrian, we've been through this. I told you how I feel. You told me under extreme duress while we were being hunted and threatened. Now that the danger has passed, you should take time to reconsider. Without the pressure of survival, without the intensity of crisis, what do you really want, Rosalind?" She stared at him, hurt blooming in her chest. "Are you saying you don't want this marriage anymore? I'm saying you deserve better than a husband who couldn't protect you, better than a man who needed your money to save his family estate, better than—" He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Better than me. That's not your decision to make, isn't it? I offered you that 5-year clause precisely for this reason, so you'd have an escape if you needed one." He turned to face her, his expression carefully controlled. "Use it, Rosalind. Take your time. Live your life without the shadow of our arrangement hanging over you. If after you've had time to breathe and think clearly, you still want this marriage, want me, then we can revisit the question. And if I say no, if I say I know what I want right now, then I'd say you're not thinking clearly, that you're still reacting to trauma and danger, and you'll regret it later." His voice was gentle but firm. "I won't trap you in something you agreed to under duress, even if that duress was emotional rather than physical." Rosalind felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "This is because I signed that document, because I was willing to give up the fortune. This is because you shouldn't have had to make that choice at all. Because I realized in that moment that I've been selfish. I married you for money, Rosalind. No matter how I dress it up, no matter what affection developed later, the foundation of this marriage is mercenary. You deserve better than that. You're punishing yourself, and me along with you. I'm giving you freedom. The freedom to choose without obligation, without the pressure of our contract or the gratitude you might feel for my protection." He crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair, just as he had that night in the library at Cartwright Hall. The night that seemed like years ago now rather than mere weeks. "I love you too much to keep you bound to a marriage you entered out of desperation. So you're sending me away. I'm giving you space, time, the chance to live the life you should have had before I proposed my selfish bargain." He took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "If you come back to me, if you choose me freely, without obligation, then I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of that choice." Rosalind wanted to argue, to fight, to refuse his noble self-sacrifice, but she could see the determination in his eyes, the pain and guilt that had been eating at him since she signed away her fortune in Thornbury's library. He wouldn't be swayed. Not tonight. Perhaps not for a long time. "How long?" she asked quietly. "How long do you want me to take?" "As long as you need." "A month? A year? 5 years, as our agreement states." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "I'll be at Cartwright Hall restoring the estate. You'll have this house, your fortune, your freedom. If you're ready, you know where to find me. And if I come tomorrow, then I'll send you away again. Because you need to know with absolute certainty that you're choosing me for the right reasons. Not gratitude, not fear, not the intensity of crisis, but genuine love, freely given." She pulled her hand from his, standing. "You're a fool, Adrian Cartwright, a noble, self-sacrificing fool, perhaps. But I'm a fool who loves you enough to let you go." He left the next morning at dawn, taking only what he'd brought with him to the marriage. Rosalind watched from her bedroom window as his carriage pulled away, carrying him back to Hampshire, back to the estate she'd helped him save, back to a life that no longer included her. She should have felt free, should have felt relieved to escape the complications of a marriage that had become so much more than she'd bargained for. Instead, she felt empty. The days that followed were strange and hollow. She threw herself into London society, attending events she'd avoided during her brief marriage. Men courted her again, wealthier now that Thornbury's conspiracy was exposed and her fortune confirmed beyond doubt. She had everything she'd supposedly wanted before Adrian entered her life: money, independence, freedom, and she had never been more miserable. Weeks passed, then a month. The season began to wind down. Friends asked about Lord Cartwright, about when he'd return to London. Rosalind made excuses, kept her pain private, and tried to convince herself that perhaps Adrian was right. Perhaps she did need this time, this space, this freedom to choose. But choosing had never been the problem. She'd known what she wanted since that midnight kiss in the library, since he'd knelt before her chair and promised to protect her, since he'd taught her to hide a knife in her boot and refused to sign Thornbury's document even under threat of death. She loved him, and he loved her. Everything else was just fear and pride and self-inflicted punishment for sins that didn't require such penance. On a Tuesday in late April, Rosalind made her decision. She would go to Cartwright Hall. She would tell Adrian that she'd had her time, her space, her freedom, and she chose him anyway. She chose their marriage, complicated and messy as it was. She chose love over independence, partnership over solitude. She began packing that very afternoon, but before she could leave London, a letter arrived. The handwriting was Adrian's, the seal his family crest. With trembling hands, she broke it open. "Dearest Rosalind, I write with news I did not wish to send by letter, but circumstances force my hand. Thornbury's debts, it seems, were more extensive than anyone realized. His creditors, unable to recover funds from him directly, have pursued legal action against his business partners. including claiming liens against properties he'd mortgaged or used as collateral. Among those properties, Cartwright Hall. It appears that my father, in his desperation years ago, had secretly borrowed from Thornbury using the estate as security. I discovered this only when Thornbury's creditors presented documentation. The debt is catastrophic, far beyond the £30,000 you so generously provided. Without immediate payment of £85,000, the estate will be seized and auctioned. I write not to ask for help. You owe me nothing, and I will not compound my failures by begging. I write merely to inform you that the estate, and with it any reason you might have to maintain our marriage, will soon be gone. The 5-year clause becomes moot when I have nothing left to offer you. I am sorry, Rosalind. Sorry for bringing you into this disaster. Sorry for the danger my desperation exposed you to. Sorry that I failed to be the husband you deserved. Please know that loving you has been the greatest honor of my life, even if I proved unworthy of that love. Yours, though you need not be mine, Adrian. Rosalind read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking with fury and heartbreak, and something that felt dangerously like despair. £85,000. A secret debt that would destroy everything they'd fought for, everything she'd helped him build. And the stubborn, prideful man wouldn't even ask for her help. She knew what she had to do. The choice was clear, painful, inevitable. She could save Cartwright Hall. She had the funds. She could pay the debt, preserve the estate, give Adrian back his family legacy. But doing so would prove him right, that she was only staying out of pity, out of obligation, out of some noble desire to rescue him rather than genuine love. Or she could let it all fall. Let him lose everything. Prove that her love wasn't contingent on his estate or his title or his ability to protect her, and watch the man she loved lose the one thing he'd sacrificed everything to save. Either choice would hurt. Either choice would change everything. Rosalind sat at her desk, her uncle's fortune spread before her in letters of credit and bank statements, and realized that money had never solved anything. It had only ever complicated the one simple truth she'd been trying to tell Adrian since that night in Thornbury's library. She loved him, with or without Cartwright Hall. With or without his title, with or without his pride intact, she loved him. And now she had to find a way to make him believe it, before it was too late for both of them. The rain began as Rosalind's carriage crossed into Hampshire, a relentless downpour that turned the roads to mud and slowed their progress to a crawl. She clutched Adrian's letter in her hands, reading it again by the dim light of the carriage lamp. Though she'd long since memorized every devastating word, she had made her choice. In her travel bag sat a bank draft for £85,000, enough to save Cartwright Hall, to pay off Thornbury's creditors, to preserve everything Adrian had fought so desperately to protect. But she would not simply hand it to him. That would prove nothing except what he already believed, that she was trapped by obligation, by pity, by the fortune that had caused nothing but suffering since the day she inherited it. No. She would offer him something else first, something that mattered far more than money ever could. The truth, her whole heart. The choice to build a life together, not because they needed each other, but because they wanted each other. And if he still refused, if his pride was too wounded, his guilt too deep, then she would save his estate anyway, sign it over to him free and clear, and walk away. She would give him everything, and ask for nothing in return, the ultimate proof that her love had never been about what he could offer her. The thought of it made her chest ache with anticipated grief. But some things mattered more than her own happiness. Adrian's legacy, his family's honor, the home he loved, those things were worth the sacrifice, even if that sacrifice meant losing him forever. Cartwright Hall appeared through the rain like a ghost of its former self. In the 6 weeks since she'd left, spring had transformed the grounds, but not with renewal. Weeds choked the gardens she'd carefully planned. Windows were dark and shuttered. The fountain stood silent, its water stagnant with fallen blossoms. It looked abandoned, dying. Rosalind's driver helped her down, and she stood in the rain for a moment, staring up at the house that had briefly been her home. Mrs. Hodge appeared at the door, her face lighting with surprised joy. "Lady Cartwright. We didn't expect. Oh, my lady, you're soaked through. Come in quickly." Inside, the house was as cold as it looked from without. Dust sheets had returned to cover furniture. The fires were unlit. Mrs. Hodge explained in hushed, worried tones that Lord Cartwright had dismissed most of the staff, keeping only essential servants. The money was gone, not to debts this time, but to legal fees, to fighting Thornbury's creditors, to desperate attempts to prove the mortgages were fraudulent. All of it futile. "Where is he?" Rosalind asked, water dripping from her cloak onto the marble floor. "The library, my lady. He's been there for 3 days, barely eating, refusing visitors." Mrs. Hodge's eyes were red-rimmed. "He's given up, I think. I've never seen him like this, not even when his father died and left everything in ruins." Rosalind shed her wet cloak and moved through the familiar corridors, her heart pounding. The library door was closed but not locked. She pushed it open without knocking. Adrian sat in his usual chair before a dead fireplace, still dressed in the same clothes from days ago, unshaven, a glass of whiskey dangling from his hand. He looked up at her entrance, and the devastation in his eyes nearly brought her to her knees. Rosalind. Her name was a broken whisper. "You shouldn't be here. Where else would I be?" She crossed the room, kneeling before his chair just as he had done for her so many times. "Adrian, I received your letter. Then you know it's over. The estate, my title's legacy, everything." He laughed bitterly. "Ironic, isn't it? I married you to save this place, and I'm losing it anyway. At least you're free now. No more obligation to a failed lord with nothing to offer. I brought the money." He stared at her, confusion clouding his grief. "What? £85,000. It's in my bag. I can pay Thornbury's creditors, clear the liens, save Cartwright Hall." She gripped his hands, forcing him to focus on her. "But I won't give it to you." Pain flashed across his face. "I see. You came to watch me lose everything, to prove I was never worthy of you. No, you stubborn fool, I came to offer you a choice." She stood, pulling him up with her. "I will save this estate. I will pay every debt, clear every lien, restore everything you've lost. But first, you have to do something for me." "What?" "Stop punishing yourself. Stop believing you're not worthy of love because you married me for money. Stop hiding behind noble self-sacrifice and wounded pride." Her voice broke. "Believe me when I say I love you. Not your estate, not your title. You, the man who taught me to hide knives in my boots, who worked alongside tenant farmers in the mud, who knelt before me and promised me freedom even when it broke his heart. Rosalind, I've had my time to think, Adrian. 6 weeks of freedom, of independence, of every option in the world open to me. And I choose you. I choose this marriage. I choose us." Tears were streaming down her face now. "But I need you to choose me too. Not out of gratitude for saving your estate. Not because you feel obligated, but because you want to. Because you love me as much as I love you." He was shaking, his grey eyes bright with unshed tears. "You would give up £85,000 for me, even knowing I have nothing left to offer. I would give up everything, the entire fortune. This is just money, Adrian. You are my life." He pulled her into his arms then, crushing her against his chest, his face buried in her hair. She felt his body shake with sobs he'd been holding back for weeks, the grief and guilt and love he'd been trying so desperately to control. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry. I've been such a fool. Pushing you away when all I wanted was to hold you. Convinced you'd be better off without me when every day apart felt like dying. Then don't send me away again. Let me stay. Let me help. Let me love you." He pulled back, cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "I don't deserve you, but God help me, I can't let you go again. I tried, Rosalind. I tried to be noble and selfless, and it nearly destroyed me. Then don't be noble. Be honest. Tell me what you want. You." The word was fierce, absolute. "I want you. Your love, your partnership, your impossible stubbornness and brilliant mind and generous heart. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to rebuild this estate together, not as patron and beneficiary, but as husband and wife, as equals, as partners, as lovers," she whispered. "Yes, as lovers." He kissed her then, desperate and tender. 6 weeks of loneliness and longing poured into that single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rosalind rested her forehead against his. "So you choose me? You choose us? I choose us? Now and always. Then I'll save Cartwright Hall. And you'll let me, without guilt or shame or wounded pride. Because that's what partners do. They help each other. They save each other. Partners, he agreed, his smile wavering between joy and tears. I can live with that. They held each other as the rain hammered against the windows, as the dying light faded to darkness. Mrs. Hodge brought food and wine, lit fires throughout the house, discreetly gave orders to prepare the Viscountess's chambers. That night, they made love for the first time, not as strangers bound by contract, but as husband and wife bound by choice. Adrian worshipped her body with trembling hands and whispered devotions, and Rosalind gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the massive bed that had belonged to generations of Cartwrights, Adrian traced patterns on her bare shoulder. I'll make you happy, he promised. I'll spend every day proving I'm worthy of your choice. You already are worthy, you always were. She kissed his jaw. But I'll let you try anyway, it will be entertaining to watch. He laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. I've missed your sharp tongue. I've missed everything about you. She snuggled closer, feeling safe and whole for the first time in weeks. We're going to be all right, aren't we? Despite everything, the conspiracy, the debts, the danger, we survived it all. We're going to be happy. We are, he murmured against her hair. I promise you, Rosalind, we're going to be happy. She believed him. In that moment, wrapped in his arms, the future stretching bright and certain before them, she believed with her whole heart. She should have known better. Fate, it seemed, had other plans. The creditors arrived 3 days later, just as Rosalind and Adrian were preparing to travel to London to settle the debts. But something was wrong. The men who appeared at Cartwright Hall weren't bankers or solicitors. They were rough-armed and led by a face Rosalind recognized with cold horror. James, the man who had accompanied Henry to kidnap them weeks ago, the man who should have been in prison with Thornbury and her cousin. How did you? Adrian began, but James cut him off with a raised pistol. Thornbury sends his regards from Newgate. Seems he has friends even in prison. Friends who don't appreciate Lady Cartwright's interference in his business. James smiled unpleasantly. We're here to collect what's owed, with interest. The debts are being paid, Rosalind said, forcing her voice to remain steady. We have the funds ready. Not those debts. The debt of ruining a powerful man's life. The debt of sending him to the gallows. James gestured to his companions. Search the house, take everything of value, and when you're done, burn it. You can't. Adrian lunged forward, but James's pistol swung toward Rosalind. One more step, my lord, and your lovely wife dies right here. Is that what you want? Adrian froze, his face ashen. The men spread through Cartwright Hall, and sounds of destruction followed. Crashes, shattering glass, paintings torn from walls. Mrs. Hodge screamed from somewhere in the house. Servants fled into the rainy afternoon. Rosalind met Adrian's eyes across the space separating them, saw the helpless fury there, the terrible calculation. He was trying to find a way out, a way to save her, to stop this. But they both knew there was none. James and his men had come for vengeance, not money. They had come to destroy everything Adrian loved, to punish Rosalind for daring to oppose Thornbury's conspiracy. They had come to finish what the poisoning, the attacks, the intimidation had failed to accomplish. Please, Rosalind said quietly, take the money, take everything. Just let the servants go, let my husband go, touching. But Thornbury's orders were clear. You both suffer. You both lose everything. James's finger tightened on the trigger, starting with each other. What happened next occurred too fast for thought, only desperate instinct. Adrian threw himself forward, pushing Rosalind aside as the pistol fired. The shot echoed through the library like thunder. Blood bloomed across Adrian's chest, a spreading crimson stain that seemed impossible, unreal. He collapsed into Rosalind's arms, his weight bearing them both to the floor. No. The word was a broken whisper. No, no, no. Adrian, stay with me, please. His hand found hers, squeezed weakly. Run, he managed, blood on his lips. Rosalind, run. But she couldn't run, couldn't leave him, could only hold him as his blood soaked through her dress, as his breathing became labored and wet, as his grey eyes, Those beautiful, honest eyes that had looked at her with such love just hours ago began to fade. "I love you," she sobbed. "Adrian, I love you. Please don't leave me." "Love you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Always." "My Rosalind." His hand went slack in hers. His chest stilled. And the man who had offered her protection, who had given her freedom, who had loved her despite believing himself unworthy, died in her arms on the library floor of the home he'd sacrificed everything to save. Rosalind's scream tore from somewhere deep and primal, a sound of anguish that seemed to shake the very walls of Cartwright Hall. She held Adrian's body, rocking back and forth, her world shattered into pieces that could never be made whole again. James looked down at them with cold indifference. "Burn it all," he ordered his men. "Leave her alive to watch. Thornbury wants her to see everything she loves turn to ash." They dragged her from Adrian's body, from the library that had been their sanctuary. Through the windows, she saw smoke beginning to rise as fires were lit throughout the house. The restoration she'd funded, the beauty she'd helped create, the home they'd built together, all of it consumed by flames born of revenge and hatred. The men threw her into a carriage and rode away, leaving her in a village 5 miles distant. By the time she convinced anyone to help, by the time constables were summoned and rescue attempted, it was too late. Cartwright Hall burned through the night, its ancient timbers feeding flames that could be seen for miles. Adrian's body was recovered from the ruins of the library, still in the spot where he'd died protecting her. The servants had mostly escaped, but Mrs. Hodge and faithful Patterson had perished, trying to save family heirlooms from the flames. James and his men were never found. Thornbury, interrogated in Newgate, claimed no knowledge of the attack. Without evidence directly connecting him, the law could do nothing. The estate, the house, the dream, all of it reduced to smoking ruins and bitter ash. 6 months later, Rosalind stood at the edge of what had once been Cartwright Hall's gardens, now overgrown and wild around the blackened stone skeleton of the manor house. Rain fell softly, as it had that terrible night, washing over the ruins that were all that remained of her brief happiness. She wore black, widow's weeds that society demanded, though their marriage had been so short that many questioned whether she had the right to grieve so publicly. In her hands, she clutched a single object saved from the fire, Adrian's signet ring, pulled from his finger before they buried him in the family plot. The fortune remained hers. £180,000, untouched except for the money she'd used trying to rebuild after the fire, an effort she'd eventually abandoned. What was the point? The house was gone. The servants were gone. Adrian was gone. Money couldn't bring back the dead. Henry had been released from prison after serving only 3 months, the evidence against him deemed insufficient for a longer sentence. He'd written to her once, a mealy-mouthed letter claiming regret, while simultaneously suggesting they could still divide the inheritance as families should. She'd burned the letter without responding. Thornbury would hang eventually. The evidence of her uncle's murder was incontrovertible. But what comfort was that? Justice for her uncle, perhaps, but it wouldn't bring Adrian back, wouldn't restore the life they'd been building together, wouldn't fill the hollow ache in her chest where her heart used to be. Lady Cartwright? She turned to find Mr. Ashford approaching through the rain, an umbrella held over his head. He'd been kind to her in the aftermath, helping with legal matters, offering what comfort he could. But even his kindness felt like mockery, a reminder that she survived while Adrian did not. "The solicitors have prepared the documents," he said gently. "If you sign, the land and ruins will be sold. The proceeds added to your accounts. You can leave Hampshire, start fresh somewhere else, somewhere without these painful memories." Rosalind looked back at the ruins. And go where? Do what? This was supposed to be my life, Mr. Ashford. This place, this man, this future that was stolen from us. I know. I'm so very sorry. Everyone's sorry. But sorry doesn't change anything, does it? She laughed bitterly. I used to think I understood tragedy, thought I knew what loss felt like when my parents died, when I was left alone. But I didn't know anything. I didn't know it was possible to hurt this much and still be breathing. Time will help. Eventually. Will it? Because it's been 6 months and it feels like yesterday. I still wake up reaching for him. Still catch myself thinking of things to tell him, plans to make together. Still hear his voice promising we'd be happy. She touched the ring hanging on a chain around her neck. He died saving me. Threw himself in front of a bullet meant for me. And I have to live with that. Every day for the rest of my life I have to live knowing he's dead because of me. That's not true, Lady Cartwright. He's dead because violent men chose violence, because Thornbury chose revenge. You're not responsible for their evil, aren't I? If I'd never inherited that fortune, none of this would have happened. My uncle would still be alive. Adrian would still be alive. Cartwright Hall would still be standing. She turned to face him fully. Sometimes I think the fortune is cursed, that it destroys everyone who touches it. Then give it away. Use it for good. Establish charitable foundations in your husband's name, in your uncle's name. Transform the instrument of tragedy into something that helps others. It was sensible advice, practical, exactly what she should do. But the thought of it, of using Adrian's death to create some sanitized legacy of good works, made her feel sick. "I'll consider it," she said instead. "But first, I need to leave this place. You're right about that. I can't heal here, surrounded by ghosts. Where will you go? Somewhere far from England. Somewhere no one knows my story or my fortune. Somewhere I can try to forget." Even as she said it, she knew it was impossible. She would never forget. The best she could hope for was to learn to live with the grief, to carry it without being crushed by its weight. They walked back to her carriage, Mr. Ashford still attempting gentle conversation about practical matters. Rosalind answered mechanically, her mind far away. That night, in a lonely inn on the road back to London, she wrote letters to the solicitors, authorizing the sale of Cartwright land, to charitable organizations, establishing the foundations Mr. Ashford had suggested, to the few friends she'd made during her brief marriage, explaining her departure from England, and one final letter, which she sealed and addressed to no one. In it, she'd written everything she'd never had the chance to say to Adrian, all the words that had died with him in that library, all the love that would never find expression except on paper no one would ever read. She tucked the letter into the box with his ring, with the few salvaged items from their marriage, and locked it away. Some things were too precious and too painful to share with the world. 10 years later, in a villa overlooking the Mediterranean, Rosalind stood on a terrace watching the sunset paint the sea in shades of gold and crimson. She was 35 now, her dark hair threaded with premature grey, her face marked by experiences that had aged her beyond her years. She had never remarried, had never even entertained the possibility. How could she, when every man she met was measured against the ghost of the one she'd loved and lost? The fortune had been largely dispersed. Foundations for widows and orphans, schools for impoverished children, hospitals bearing Adrian's name. She kept enough to live comfortably, but the rest she'd given away trying to scrub the blood from money that had cost so many lives. It hadn't worked. The guilt remained. The grief remained. The hollow ache where happiness used to live remained. She had survived, as people do, had built a quiet life in Italy, far from England and its painful memories. She spoke fluent Italian now, had friends among the expatriate community, filled her days with painting and reading and the slow, steady work of existing. But she was not happy, had not been happy since that rainy night when Adrian died in her arms and Cartwright Hall burned to ash. Love, she had learned, was not always enough. Sometimes circumstances conspired against even the strongest affection. Sometimes evil triumphed despite the best intentions. Sometimes people who deserved happiness died, while those who deserved punishment lived on. Her uncle had been murdered for his fortune. Adrian had been murdered protecting her from the consequences of that fortune. And she lived on, wealthy and lonely, a monument to the terrible truth that money could buy everything except the things that truly mattered. As the sun sank below the horizon, Rosalind touched the ring at her throat, Adrian's ring, worn now for a decade as a reminder of what she'd had and lost. "I chose you," she whispered to the empty air, to the ghost that haunted her still. "I chose us." And it wasn't enough. The sea offered no answer. The sunset faded to darkness, and Rosalind turned back to her villa, to another evening alone, to the endless succession of days that stretched before her like a prison sentence. She had everything a woman could want: wealth, freedom, security. And she would trade it all without hesitation for one more day with the man who had taught her that love was worth any sacrifice, even the sacrifice of happiness itself. Did this tragic love story move you? What do you think Rosalind should have done differently? Or was their fate inevitable from the moment fortune entered her life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale of aristocratic passion and heartbreaking loss, please subscribe to the channel for more stories of romance, tragedy, and the devastating cost of love in a world where money and power corrupt everything they touch. Hit the like button if this story touched your heart, and remember, sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that end in tears. Thank you for listening to this journey through Victorian England's darkest corners, where not even true love could overcome the cruelty of fate. Until next time, may your own love stories find happier endings than poor Rosalind and Adrian ever could.